I hear the sounds of your heartbeat. I can hear it now. I can hear it now. I hear the sounds of your heartbeat. I can hear it now. I can hear it now. I hear the sounds of your heartbeat. I can hear it now. I can hear it now.
Oh, all right. Hey, thanks for stopping back in again today. I've got somebody else that's visiting with us. It's Stewart Staudinger from Alberta. He's another one of the people that's going to be presenting some information at the Veterans for Freedom event in Red Deer this Saturday. I'm going to be there, so I'm glad to actually be able to get out and meet Stu in person. He's also got a social media profile. He's the Real Canuck Lib. And if you check my Twitter stream, you'll find him there. I've just retweeted his identity and the stream. So, and I still don't know what the fuck to call these things. It's a stream. It's a podcast. I'm really not big on labels. So, do with that what you will. Anyways, hey Stu, thanks for taking some time out of your day. And like I know you're committed to the Veterans for Freedom and the Canadians for Truth event. And I think this is important to have some of these conversations and definitely introduce some of the speakers that are going to be out there. I'm not going to try and steal away the content that you're going to be providing for the weekend, but we can definitely hop into some conversations. You're obviously a veteran. We can see by the images in the background there that you got going on. So, Stu, can you take a couple of seconds and just introduce yourself to all of our guests?
All right, cool. Yeah, I was born and raised in Central Alberta, so I went to originally I was going to school in Sylvan Lake, where my dad was farming with his two brothers, and in '86 they split that partnership up, and we moved out to Alex, which is east of Lacombe, about I guess 20 kilometers. And Dad bought a ranch here. He was in purebred cattle, so I grew up here. Finished high school in the local high school, but my mother's British, so I had dual citizenship because she applied for naturalization when I was a kid. So I decided to go to university in the UK, study engineering. So I went to Loughborough University in the Midlands in the UK. Started in '92, but while I was there, I applied to join the Royal Air Force. My dad's cousin was a Hornet pilot up at Cold Lake at the time, and he said the opportunities were much better in the RAF at the time. I had a good chat with him, and he said to see if I could get in. So I applied. I got in. I got what they call a university bursary, which is kind of like an ROTC type thing. So I did 4 years at university in UK, got my degree in aeronautical engineering, and then joined the Royal Air Force as a pilot. Ended up flying tactical helicopters. Did that through my career, and came out the other end as a flight commander in 2013, retired, came back to Canada. Early 2014, I joined the Canadian Forces Reserve up at Edmonton, flew a 408 squadron out of Edmonton for 3 years as a reservist. And in March 2017, I stepped out of the military completely. And so now I'm just a retired reserve list Royal Air Force officer and a bison rancher. So I've kind of gone headfirst into regenerative agriculture and ranching, and I'll tell you in about 10 years' time if it was a good idea or not.
No, but at the same time, in a pre-conversation, you said that you're a reservist until the age of 65. Is that correct? Or did I hear that wrong?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, so in the British military is a bit different to the Canadian Forces. In the Canadian Forces, they try and get your hooks in for what they call the supplemental reserve for 5 years when you leave. But in the British military, it's I can't remember, it's about a 4 or 5 year commitment if you're a junior officer. But as soon as you get to senior officer rank, then they keep you in the primary reserve until, well, actually I think it's till you're 55, and then and your commission remains active till you're 65. So they can pull you in as a backfill, staff officer type thing. If they have an emergency and they got a massive war pops up, they can pull you in until you're old and crusty, pretty much.
Yeah, and I know with my son, when he was Canadian Forces, Princess Pat's out of Shiloh, he'd looked at, some of the education programs inside of these things. And the unfortunate part is the enrollment dates, and it seems to be a lot like what we're seeing for the pension dates for the members of Parliament right now, is that they give you a pension date that's just short of your actual time in Parliament, or just short in time of your time in service, so that you actually have to complete a second contract before you can go through the educational programs. Is that the same thing that you had to go through?
Not really. The British military is set up completely differently to Canadian Forces. So when I got my sponsorship at university, I was committed to what they call a short service commission, which was 12 years. So it's a bit longer than a standard contract in the Canadian Forces. And then I was originally just going to do the 12 years and then come back to Canada, but I got into tactical aviation, and I was enjoying myself and doing fairly well at it. So I signed on to what they call a permanent commission, which takes you till you're 38 years old, if that's the contract you go on to, and then if you achieve senior rank, then you can go on beyond that. So I left when I was just shy of my 40th birthday, and I could have gone on to stay in the forces, go to advanced staff college, and stay until I was 55. But the family sort of toll for that sort of thing, particularly with Afghanistan, was still on at the time, and that was just a little bit much. We had a little baby at home, and my wife was pregnant with our second, and I was looking at a 1-year tour in Afghanistan, with only a 2-week period of leave in the middle of it, and I figured that was just a little bit too much for me. So I decided discretion is a better part of valor, to get out and find something else to do.
No, that's fair enough, because I know my son is in the same situation. And even when the Ukraine thing started up, he was already completed his contract. He was just on the reservist list. Excuse me. But he looked at signing up for the Foreign Legion just so he could actually go out to Ukraine. So once you've committed to your life of service, it doesn't seem to end at your life of service under contract. It becomes a much bigger, broader deal, in that this is what I've been trained and this is what I'm meant to do. Is that the same for you?
Yeah. I mean, it's one of these things where, if circumstances were different, I mean, I'm Canadian, so by birth, and I missed the outdoors in Alberta and stuff, so I came back. So I was quite a distance away, but I've got buddies of mine in the UK that, when they got out of the Reg Force in the UK, they joined as reserve pilots, and would work as instructors on the conversion unit or that sort of thing, and just stay linked to it. But I think there's something a little bit deeper than that. Some people take it more serious than others, but you make a commitment to standing for a certain set of principles, and standing up for a particular version of society, which doesn't seem to be valued by some people, but it is by some of us. And so there's a moral commitment that's actually a lifelong commitment. That sacrificial service thing doesn't go away just because you've taken off the uniform and taken a different path. It's still there. Once a warrior, always a warrior, and you're not going to get it out of there.
And inside of that, and I'm going to go with like smaller things here. Like for my kid, he was a bit of a, I mean, let's go with it. He was a bit of a slob, and I'm not going to say that we always made the best parenting decisions inside of his youth growing up. And my wife cleaned up after the kids religiously because they were slobs. So I've got 2 boys. He's the youngest. My son that was in the Canadian Forces. He was the younger of the 2. Oh, lost Stu for a second here. Let's hope to get him back into the stream. See how this plays out. And I hope we don't suffer through the same things that we suffered through last evening with Kelly, and that this is the high traffic time for internet. Oh, he's coming back in, and that we see a lot of the same things that are going on. So let's see if I can add him back in here. Sorry, are you there, man?
Yeah, I don't know what happened there. I suddenly got a
Playing
black screen of death.
yeah, a little game of what does this button do, right? Hey, no. So when my son was in the military, again, I'm going to go through this. He was a bit of a slob, and his mother cleaned up after both of our children religiously. And when he came back, he had a greater sense of who he was as a person by the cleanliness inside of his personal spaces. I mean, he went from scrubbing floors in St. John, Quebec, going through his boot camp and going through Wainwright and then going through his time in Shiloh, Manitoba. And he came back as a different person. And the different person that he is right now, he's more family oriented and he's a lot more in key with his local surroundings. So it's more of a celebration of the things that you have around you because at any point in time, these things can disappear. And the biggest thing for him, and he's translated this to his mother, and I'm not sure where I sit on this. One of the stories that he'd shared with us was when he was in the military. You get up, you make your bed proper, and it's tight to sheet, tight to fit, so that when you get back to the barracks or get back to your room, that as terrible of a day as you've had, the one thing that you have look forward to is a crisp bed with crisp sheets so that you can actually have a good night's sleep. Is that the same for you, Stu, or is that unique to him in what he's brought home?
I suppose early on, yeah, when going through officer training, the early stages, what we call basic induction module, it was a bit of that because you're basically been beaten around by a flight sergeant. He's out there. His job is to mold you into what the Air Force wants you to be. So there is a little bit of that, but I guess there's a little bit more to that. I had an infantry officer as my flight commander going through officer training, and he was the Royal Air Force has a unit called the Royal Air Force Regiment, which is it's a air defense. It was originally air defense and infantry. It's now mostly just infantry, but it's effectively airfield defense and airfield attack type role, including a squadron of paratroopers. And so I had one of these guys as my flight commander going through training, and a lot of and his emphasis on it was less of that thing that you're looking forward to when you get back. It was more about maintaining the discipline to keep yourself, what we call survive to operate. To even when you're tired, your brain's not working, your feet are sore, all that kind of stuff. That when you stop, you don't just crash out. You take time to square away your gear. You take time to treat any injuries and sores that you've got. If you got blisters on your feet, you treat that. You make sure you fix everything before you then crash out, because if you forget that stuff or you let your hygiene fall or whatever, you're going to get sick. You're going to go down with injury, and then you're no use to everybody else, and you become a burden. So it was a slightly different philosophy, I guess. Officer training is maybe a little bit different, where you're trying to make sure that you're squared away so that you're able to do the job of leading the guys that you're leading. That the sergeant or staff sergeant or whoever is your NCO doesn't have to worry about you. He can worry about looking after the boys while you're getting on with the job of planning the next mission and that kind of stuff. So the effect is the same, but the emphasis is a little bit different. But I can see that there is an element of that where you come back and you're just like, oh man, it's nice to have that little space that's squared away already. I don't have to worry about it.
Well, no, and your shit is already prepped for the following days, right? Everything's already ready. Oh
yeah. There is that, and that's the, but that's part of that field discipline, and it feeds into, and my flight commander was really keen on this, and I was glad that I had an infantry guy as my flight commander. Um, was that the emphasis was, you do this, in your barracks, or you're in the officers mess, your home base. You do this to build the habits that will keep you out of trouble when you're deployed. So when you're living in like a HESCO shelter or tent or whatever in the desert, and things can be a little bit shitty, then you still take the time to square yourself away and ensure that you aren't carrying injuries that you shouldn't. You're getting your life sorted out. You're making sure you're taking on water and food and all the kind of stuff you need to do to ensure that tomorrow, or 3 hours later, as it often is, or even 2 hours later, when you get kicked out of your cot to get out, to go out and do something, you're fit to be able to do it. You're not a burden on the rest of the guys around you. So that's the thing, is building that habit, so that even in the rough conditions, you're still going to keep yourself fit and healthy to operate.
Now, in certain conditions, growing up as a Canadian, and this goes back, I'm going to say, a little bit before your time, because I'm moderately older. Moderately. I mean, I feel old and shitty, but I'm moderately older than you are. And, we grew up with a lot of the same things, but they were regimented not through military training. They were regimented through family values and Christian values inside of our homes. So, every day that I woke up as a 3 to 5 year old, we were coached into making our own beds, into washing our own dishes, into cleaning up after ourselves. And a lot of us grew up hating that and didn't pass it on to future generations, and that's why we see a bit of a portion of the world that we're seeing right now. But like, from what you've seen, what you've lived through, like, do you view your family values or your values on just getting up and preparedness as being something that every Canadian should kind of come to accept?
Yeah, I mean, there is a certain amount of that, and it's interesting because if you look at the military in general, the UK figures are slightly different because it's such a highly urbanized population. But in Canada, I think it's about 45% of all military members come from a rural or small town background, and so there is that more traditional cultural aspect to it. And for example, I grew up on a ranch, so you know I was out doing chores and shoveling a creep feeder full of chop or whatever after school. There was work to be done, and instilling that in youth, I think, is valuable, and I think we're missing a lot of that in our society. And it feeds into the values of people who join the military, because they've got a little bit of a sense of, as we say as in the RAF, service before self. They understand that there's a bigger picture, that the world's not just about them, and unfortunately we've lost quite a bit of that in our society. The cult of me has taken over, but certainly, yeah, I think those more traditional values, I think, are valuable, and I think we should do what we can to bring them back in the best way we can, because like you say, those who have kind of thrown them off and not passed them on to the next generation are now reaping the whirlwind, unfortunately. We're seeing that in our society.
And in the cult of us, just as kind of what you're excuse me, talking about, we haven't just swung away from doing these things. We've swung to the absolute opposite of doing these things, where people don't seem to feel the same need to, let's call it, bathe on a regular basis, and they just don't give a shit about what they look like in a public place. And along with that goes, a lot of traditional values, and my generation calls them chivalry, because I was never in the military. Oh, we've lost Stu here for another couple of seconds, so we're going to get back into it when he hops back in. And this is the biggest part about working the live streams with people inside of the military or inside of the province is that we don't have the same connections that are obviously available. Not everybody is able to work with live streams, so we're going to suffer through some of these technical difficulties. Welcome back, Stu. Anyways, what I was saying is that we've swung away from the conversations of responsibility and personal accountability into a complete separate norm of the exact opposite, the polar opposite of that, where you can get fat, you can get lazy, you can color your hair blue or purple, pierce a bone through your fucking nose, and you seemingly are more readily accepted, or that the mainstream wants to make you believe that you're more acceptable as being an oddity than you are in the celebration of your community, of your lifestyle, and of your traditional family. And I don't think that that's really where we want to go as a society, because that seems to lead to the breakdown in society.
No, it does. But this is the thing: is that we've got the two, opposing worldviews that political sort of stream um, that drive either towards personal responsibility or away from personal responsibility. And unfortunately, the mollycoddling of society, where people are looking for free stuff, they want someone else to solve their problems for them. You can just see what happened in the last 3 years with COVID. We had so many people who just abdicated any sense of responsibility for what was going on around them, what happened to their neighbors, etc. Rather than sit down and spend an hour or two reading some proper research papers to find out what's actually going on, or go and do a little bit of digging. Everyone just, I say everyone, a large portion of the population just completely credulous. They just sit and watch mainstream news, just take what they get fed, whatever BS that comes along. Excuse me. and and offload their own personal responsibility to somebody else. And we see it in public health, and obviously there's a propaganda campaign behind it as well. We say that we won the Second World War, but the rot that led to the Second World War carried on, unfortunately, and we ended up with this very statist, nanny state mentality that's great for people who just want a passive population that'll do as they're told. But it's not good for the health and welfare of society as a whole. We've lost the social fabric that held our society together for hundreds of years, and I don't see it as a positive thing. And unless we fix it, there's going to be a massive amount of suffering that comes along with it, because Thomas Sowell has some very good points on this, but he said no society ever thrived when it had a growing class of parasites living off of it. And it's no different than a cow being overtaken by worms. If the parasite load in a cow or a sheep gets too big, the animal dies, and then they all die. And unfortunately, that's where we're going as a society right now. And so we need to try and instill a little bit more, personal responsibility back into it, and get some of the parasitic load off society, or we're in deep trouble.
I think those are all really good points. But along the same lines, I'm going to throw you in the hot seat here. Have you been vaccinated for COVID-19?
Nope. There's no such thing as a vaccine for COVID-19.
Well, and that's absolutely true. And a lot of us, a lot of the people that are going to be viewing this stream are going to say the exact same thing, because it's not an actual vaccination, and it's literally been proven inside of the courts inside of the United States. In Florida, I believe it is right now, where they said that it's not actually a vaccination. And the fact that they had to change the word or the definition of vaccination or vaccine to go along with the COVID vax was probably one of the most egregious parts of the mandates and the worldwide narrative of these things, right?
Yeah, well, I mean, the thing is, they didn't even change the definition legally because they couldn't. All they did was change the narrative. They claimed things about it that were blatantly untrue. And and I just looked at it, and well, for me, it was like smell a rat right away. And I knew things were going sideways when we had this whole lockdown thing came in March 2020, and I was like, okay, where's this at? So I thought, well, I'll just go look at the data. So I dug up the data on the Diamond Princess, and I looked at Michael Levitt's work out of Stanford University. He was a 2013 Nobel laureate biophysicist, so I figured he might be able to do math. And and the infection fatality rate for COVID-19 was only 0.15 or 0.14. I thought, well, that's just seasonal flu. There's nothing new. So it was a nothing burger from the start. So as soon as they started flapping and saying, "Oh, we need to roll out a vaccine super fast," and this, that, and the other, you knew that it was going to be BS right from the start. And there were other people who just, they've got stuff in their lives, they got work, they got family, they got other stuff, so they're not necessarily paying quite as much attention. But for anyone who was halfway paying attention, it was pretty obvious that when they started screaming and shouting about, "Oh, we need to develop a vac super quickly," and meanwhile we found that there were multiple therapeutics that work perfectly well on it, and it was a nothing burger. You could tell it was a scam. Global. If it's somebody is some, and there's a great one from Nick Hudson from South Africa. He said, if something is presented as a global problem that requires a global solution, it's a scam. There's no such thing as a global problem. There's no such thing as a global solution.
Yeah, and along the same lines, I think it was, I can't remember his name, where he said that if there's a consensus on science, reach for your wallets because you're about to be scammed. Michael Crichton, literal quote,
Exactly.
and it's along the same lines. Now, you're obviously versed into, somewhat of the health side of things, and I'm not going to throw you in the hot seat about being an epidemiologist or a vaccinologist or a healthcare professional. Of all the things that you took throughout the COVID scam, what made you the healthiest?
Well, I didn't
kept
worry
you
about it
from
much at all.
dying? Yeah,
Well, metabolic health.
smart people.
I mean, first off, coronaviruses. I mean, I quickly did the deep dive on what coronaviruses are like. Coronaviruses are generally affect people who have poor metabolic health, and we've had a couple of health issues in our family going back. We've got autoimmunity. My wife and kids have got a couple of autoimmune disorders and stuff. So I went down the deep dive of human health. I started looking at ancestral paleo diets way back in the late 90s when I was training for a commando course that I never went and did because I injured myself. But anyway, so I'd been kind of floating around the healthy paleo diet thing for a long time, and then when my wife got very sick, we went onto a quite strict, what we call a PKD, Paleolithic ketogenic diet. So we're talking about like an ancestral paleo diet a few years ago. So when I looked at what coronaviruses do and who they target, I was like, well, that's not us. Big deal. It's a nothing burger. And as it was a nothing burger. And to me, the biggest thing anyone could have done was to cut seed oils and simple refined carbohydrates out of their diet. And in 9 days, you'd stabilize your metabolic health, and COVID becomes a nothing burger. It's that simple. And you can add vitamin D. You can take ivermectin to mitigate the spread of it at the start. There's a number of things that can be done on top of that if you do get sick. But basic human health: eat something that's species appropriate, and deal with metabolic health. Like the Americans got hammered with COVID because 88%, this is 2018 figures, 88% of Americans show at least one marker of metabolic disease. There's only 12% of Americans who could be considered healthy. Well, what do you expect, out of a disease that targets metabolic health if everyone in your society is already sick? I mean, 88% of Americans had a comorbidity. I mean, that's the problem. But if you look at other countries like Japan, where everyone's healthy, nothing happened. Like literally nothing happened. You can't even see a blip on their figures, on their stats.
So, what's the difference between metabolic and genetic health from your standpoint? And I'm not asking you this as trying to discard what you're saying, but from your personal understanding, what's the difference between metabolic health and genetic health?
Well, genetic health, it's I think there's a bit of a misunderstanding on this sort of stuff. Um, Genetic health doesn't necessarily mean that you're on, if you got genetic susceptibility to something, it doesn't mean that you're unhealthy. It means that you have more susceptibility to something, to a condition or whatever, than somebody else might have. But as we discovered with my wife and kids, they've got a genetic susceptibility to autoimmunity triggered by gluten and also dairy protein. And actually, the dairy protein one is way more common than people think. Um, but if you can control the conditions that are causing that autoimmune reaction, um, then the metabolic health issue is not an issue. And so, you know, there are some people who can get away with more because they don't have the genetic predispositions for some diseases. But that doesn't mean that they're inherently more healthy, because anyone can make themselves unhealthy. Um, to me, it's all it means is someone like my wife has just got to be more careful with what she eats than other people to maintain the same level of metabolic health. But as long as you do that, then you're pretty much breaking even.
And I think what you said right there, anybody can make themselves unhealthy, is probably the biggest part of the key to what we're seeing inside of Canada, the United States, globally, and what we've seen throughout
Yeah.
the COVID period. In that, if you maintain, I mean, genetics you can't control. What you consume, you can control. And the largest,
Yeah.
what you consume is metabolic health. That literally defines your metabolic health. And by
Yeah.
consumption, we can boil that down into, if you smoke cigarettes, if you drink alcohol, your metabolic health, that's what you metabolize, is lower.
Yeah.
Whereas your genetics are a much different situation. And when we've seen this was the most amusing thing. Everybody claiming that they were immunocompromised. The number of people that were perfectly healthy, that drank fruit juices
Oh,
and had the proper diets. In the beginning of COVID, they all automatically hopped into the I'm immunologically compromised, and you need to take your vaccine for my health. Seemed really fucking stupid. and pardon my profanity in these things, but it was literally that bad. And that we'd seen a lot of people that claimed that they were unhealthy for the sake of, I'm going to say, it's social justice, to try and coax other people into the jab, or for their social credit, more so than they were actually unhealthy.
yeah.
Now, go ahead.
What do they call it? Munchausen syndrome, or something along. Anyway, there's a couple of different syndromes where basically you gain attention by pretending to be sick, or by claiming that someone else is sick. So you project it onto somebody else. And it Matthias Desmet. I don't know if you've watched any of his stuff. He's the Belgian psychologist who talks about mass formation psychosis, or whatever you want to call it. He describes it pretty well about the problem we got in the Western world. And going back to these traditional values you mentioned at the beginning, there's so many people who are completely unmoored from the normal human, life structure. I mean, we're a pack hunter when it comes right down to it. We were put on this earth in a condition where we're supposed to survive in an extended family unit. Let's go back to your average Paleolithic people not so long ago. We survive in small groups. We have a range of talents and skills. It's generally a meritocracy. If you don't work, you don't eat. And and so, but people had those connections in that unit. Everyone had their role. Everyone knew what they were doing. They, when someone brought home the bison, there was the whole, clan or whatever would get together, and there was all the whole process of processing it and cooking it and sitting down and eating and sharing family stories and sharing stories of the hunt and all this sort of stuff that went on. So there were all these close interpersonal connections. We now have a society where humans that are designed to live in that sort of environment are coming out of broken families, broken homes. They don't have close personal relationships. They're being told that their career is more important than family, and so a lot of especially young women are suffering a lot, that they go off and they start a career and they get to the age 40, and then they suddenly find that they're alone and have no one in their life to fill those holes that are normally filled by friends and family, and so they end up having high levels of anxiety and all sorts of stuff that just piles on, and so this is this whole thing in society where they're now trying to seek attention or fill those holes with something else, and they fill it by latching on to the latest crazy. We went from mask season to jab season to let's go fight in Ukraine season to, oh, we forgot about that, now we're going to go do something else season. Everyone's got to latch onto the next biggest social contagion because they've got nothing in their own life to moor them and give them contentment. And it's a tragedy, but it's where we are. I mean, I forget the stat in the States. It's something like 60% of Americans under the age of 40 have no significant close personal relationship in their life. That's ridiculous. I mean, it's insane, really, when you think about it. And that's where we're at.
It's not just ridiculous. It's actually kind of fucking sad. Oh, Stu dropped out again. So I want to talk a little bit about what Stu was going over there. In that meritocracy, when you actually achieve something by your own actions, is actually a pretty big thing inside of your life. Whereas if somebody else is going to lend you their ideas of what your achievement actually means, it doesn't mean as much. Hey, welcome back again, Stu. So I'm going through through the meritocracy side of things, and a big portion of this is I don't think that that a lot of people want to go through what their achievements actually are, and I can equate this to, and it's very broad here, is that we used to, and we still do, celebrate people that have handicaps that have achieved inside of, traditional places. And there's a lot of people that don't feel like they have those same handicaps, which means that they somehow feel burdened to not be able to achieve by not having a handicap. So now what they're actually doing is they're actually diving in on what handicap actually means and promoting their special productivity to being a detriment on themselves, or being a hurdle that they've had to cross to try and make their achievements, however minuscule they are, be that much more meaningful.
Yeah, well, I think part of it is they misunderstand the merit that comes out of trial and sacrifice. They misjudge that, and they make it look as though it's good to be a victim of some kind, right? Whereas if you look at the
and
guys,
that's right.
It's that victim
the oppression
mentality.
Olympics.
The oppression Olympics, and it's insane, and and that's why what's his name, the Marine who was blown up in Afghanistan just as they were pulling out. You look at him, and he's lost limbs, and he's literally held together by a bunch of nuts and bolts and screws and whatever. But his whole mindset, he doesn't want to be a victim. If anyone could claim victimhood, it'd be him, but he doesn't want to, because that's not his mindset. He earned those scars. and to him, it's not a matter of being a victim. He volunteered to be there. He was a he was an NCO in the U.S. Marines, and he took a hit for the team. And yeah, I mean, society, guy like him who's got a lot of physical challenges because he's been very badly injured and filled with shrapnel and everything else. You know, we kind of society owes him a debt of gratitude, and to help him out to deal with the the handicaps that come along with those sort of injuries. But his mindset is not a victim mentality. That was like, he's got more of a warrior mentality. These are scars well earned, and if I can use these to help other people, that's what I'm going to do. And it's a completely positive, forward thinking, outside of himself mentality. That sort of sacrificial service thing. Whereas we have a lot of people that, I don't know, it comes out of this neo-Marxist ideology that anyone who doesn't succeed is a victim, and therefore they deserve to have more compassion and everything else. It's the negative side of compassion that literally destroys people's lives. But they, like I say, it's that, like you said, that oppression Olympics. Everyone wants to jump on board and be an oppressed person, whereas the people who actually could claim it aren't. Yeah, I get frustrated by the whole thing. It drives me nuts when I see so many people who could claim it and don't, because they're just better people, and they set themselves against a higher standard. And then we've got people who are not victims. They've just refused to take responsibility for their lives, playing the oppression game, and trying to get social, what do they call it, social credit score out of it. It drives me nuts, and it's totally unnecessary, and it's harming society.
No, and I see the same thing, and I think a lot of us have seen the same thing for years, if not decades. In that, there's a lot of handicap parking around shopping malls and grocery stores and public
Yeah.
events, that sort of thing. And I generally don't have a problem with that. Generally, what I do have a problem with is when I see somebody park in a handicapped spot and walk out of their vehicle because they have a handicap placard, in their rear view, and they walk out fine. Or if I see, morbidly obese people walking out of a vehicle, yes, you're handicapped, but you've literally placed yourself in that situation. Now, I worked with a senior inside of the city of Calgary. And there's a lot of times when the handicap spaces are taken. So, we search for the closest next. And I keep the handicap placard inside of my vehicle, but absolutely 10 out of 10 will not use that to for my convenience. If I'm not with
Yeah.
somebody else that suffers from issues that is legitimately handicapped, won't use that. But yet I see at the same time people that are conditioned by their own metabolic diseases, or people that have a family member that is handicapped, will use those things for, again, it's not social credit. It's just a matter of convenience, and to me it's disturbing. It's disgusting.
No, I agree with you. Um, I mean, the irony is some of the people with the metabolic dysfunction. I understand the issue. We've been propagandized to adopt all this junk food, seriously metabolically unhealthy food, for, well, decades really. It's paid for by the sugar industry and the seed oil industry back in the 60s and 70s, and they pushed it. But that doesn't. The thing that frustrates me is people who are willing to accept. Oh, how's the term? Yeah, just accept the fact that they're in that condition, not do any of the effort. I mean, it doesn't take a lot of effort to figure out why you've got a metabolic issue that results in obesity, and then expect the rest of society to bear the burden on it. And it's not that people wouldn't be willing to help them get out of the situation if they wanted to, but it's the fact that they don't want to, and then they're still willing to burden other people with it, or fill the handicap spot that legitimately should be for someone who has got a serious injury, perhaps an amputee or something like that they physically can't fix, and need the spot. So, yeah, it strikes me as well, it's the cult of self, as said earlier. There's a little bit too much inward looking, too much, as we'd call in the British military, navel gazing, where people they spend most of their time looking in the mirror rather than looking out and seeing the world around them. A life focused on me doesn't necessarily lead to a good life.
A big part of that, I believe, is fed by the internet, where they can gain social credit or that dopamine hit off of just getting simple likes on a post
Oh yeah,
by playing victim.
yeah, oh yeah. I know. I find it astounding. I I don't know. Maybe there's something wrong with me. I get more fun on Twitter when I get the fight back. I enjoy I enjoy the tangle more than the likes. But yeah, no, it's that but it is trying to fill that social hole left by traditional family and
And again, we have another bit of a lull in the conversation. And I'm going to go on with this. And for the simple reason being is because, I've suffered from some metabolic challenges. And by metabolic challenges, I don't want anybody to feel sympathy for me because I have consumed myself into a terrible health situation. And it's been a detriment to me. And looks like we've got Stu back now. So let's get him back into the conversation. So, Stu, you disconnected, but I was going to go through my own personal situation for a couple of seconds. In that, I'd consumed myself into a horrible health condition, a horrible health situation, and I was bedridden for about 5 years. So I could get out of bed, I could do some basic functions, basic
yeah,
work patterns, and then when I'd get home, I'd basically go to bed, and I was in a great amount of pain. And with that, I just couldn't get the treatment that I wanted out of our healthcare services. So I ended up consuming a lot of pills and a lot of booze to basically medicate myself into not having pain. But what that did was made the pain greater and made the condition last longer. And I was literally in a point in my life where I'd welcomed death. I'm not going to say I was suicidal, but I'd welcomed death because I just didn't want to
yeah,
be in pain anymore. And the one thing that changed it for me is that I became a grandfather. So when my children, my oldest boy, announced that they were going to be having a baby, it was like it's really time to get busy living, or it's time to get busy dying. And I was already busy dying, so it was time to flip the switch for me. And what I started to do is I started to do some basic research on my own metabolic health, my consumption patterns, and realized that it's a very complex world that you're going to live in. But the second thing is that you can walk away from it being healthier than you can walk away from being treated by our traditional health care system and by pharmaceuticals. So, I mean, I
yeah,
equate a big portion of my healing to something that cost me $1.69 in the ethnic food aisle of Superstore. I started taking Methy, and I'd lived life on what do we call it? Acid reflux. I was taking Tums. I had gastrointestinal issues. I was taking Gaviscon. I was taking Pepto. I was taking Xanax. Xanax, whatever whatever Pfizer's being sued for
yeah,
right now. So I was
yeah,
taking all of the traditional medicines. They did nothing for me. The pain was immense. And then what I'd come to realize through again studies is that our CNS, our central nervous system, is over a period of time is controller of our bodies. So to explain this in simplicity is when you're a grand amount of pain, your body goes into a GI impact. And what it does is it makes you nauseous. So if you're in a car accident or a horrible, terrible accident
Yeah.
With physical injury, your body gets physically nauseous, and that's just a simple reaction. And what it equates down to, and boiling it down to, is that pain is an actual signal to stupid people. You sprain your ankle, you stub your toe, whatever that looks like, is your body has an immune reaction to that. The pain, however, is a what is it? Let's call it the red flag. Let's call it the big warning signs for you to not step on a sprained ankle or not try and kick a soccer ball with your broken toe, right?
Yeah.
Now, when you go on with these patterns of injury and you continuously ignore your body, then your central nervous system takes over and says, whoa, buddy, you're not listening to us. So what we're going to do is we're going to trigger a GI impact. And you're actually, if you're ignoring your pain, is we're going to make you physically sick on top of it. And I'd suffered through an enormous amount of pain through chronic headaches, through arthritis, and through injury. That I'd set my pain up on a separate shelf, and what I started to do is I started to deal with my GI issues through, again, Tums and Stu's topping up. So I'd started to deal with my my GI issues through Tums and Xanax and through antacids, thinking that was the big thing. But I still had to treat my pain, and in treating my pain, I could kind of moderately get through things. And Stu's back, so welcome back again, Stu. So what I was saying is, in dealing with my pain, through pharmaceuticals, alcohol, and over-the-counter pain meds, I could deal with the pain, but I couldn't deal with the GI issues. And the GI issues, well, when you're taking, enormous amounts of pharmaceuticals and alcohol and not maintaining your body, through traditional practices for what we know for the Western world, what it does is it amplifies the situation. And that's why I got to a point where, like, I literally didn't want to live anymore. And again,
Yeah.
I walked into the the ethnical food aisle of Superstore and picked up a pack of supplement seeds that cost me $1.69. Whereas if I would have bought them encapsulated or in capsules online, would cost me $20, and I would get less than I'm going to say 1/5 of the same amount for $20. So
Yeah.
it was so much more expensive for me to try and get healthy than it was for me to be unhealthy. To be unhealthy, we actually subsidize unhealthy through taxes, and we don't subsidize being healthy through the same taxation system, which is probably one of the greatest tragedies in human health as far as global health is concerned these days.
Oh yeah, definitely. Yeah, it's turned into it's effectively it's a scam. I say a scam. It's not a scam. It's a business model. It just seems like a scam for the people that are on the receiving end of it. But the push towards allopathic medicine and pushing away all the other forms of medicine that we had, prior to the 20s, and just settling on one particular pharmaceutically driven, form of medicine. Yet it worked great when you're talking about treating trauma. The Western medicine is very good at treating trauma in the short term. It's terrible at maintaining, population health. The Japanese are way better at it than we are, because we're a self-healing machine if we're given the right material to do it. And you walk into Superstore, you're talking about picking a particular aisle, but if the average person went out and ignored everything that's in the center, if it's in an aisle and it's in the dry goods aisles, ignore it. Only shop from the outside ring around the outside. If you want a few veggies, go ahead, have a few veggies. If you don't worry about it. Run through the meat section, and walk out and pay. And if your food doesn't rot, don't eat it. We spent most of human existence eating what we could catch, right? And the sort of plants that were out there that we could eat in most of the world's environment were very, very few. It was mostly fruits and berries, and it was seasonal. Everything else was what we could catch. Physiologically, we're a facultative carnivore. And if we simplify it, go back to what we're meant to eat, then we can avoid a lot of this stuff. And the idea, I mean, it's like I say, this business model is a bit crazy. I mean, let's see, look at Monsanto. Bayer Pharmaceuticals owns Monsanto. So you use a chemical agricultural model to raise lots of high calorie, low nutrient food, which causes metabolic disease and a bunch of other, chronic diseases, which you then medicate away the symptoms of for the last 20 years of everyone's life. So you have 20 years of chronic disease at the end of life. And they probably own a chain of funeral homes at the end. So they're able to capitalize on the entire system from one end to the other. So they make money making you sick. They make money treating your symptoms without actually curing the illness. And then they make money putting you in the ground. It's sick, but it's actually a business model. And it works for that. It works from a point of view of a pharmaceutical executive who's making money.
There's one thing that you forgot inside of that is that we're actually replicating breast milk with nutritional valued water-based formulas for infants. So when kids get onto a sugar addiction through these things, like what metabolic conditions are they going to face as an adolescent into adulthood by being an addict to these concoctions, these potions that are created. So it's literally if it was just what you said, you eat a McDonald's cheeseburger that's let's call it farmed out to the pharmaceuticals that are paying for the terrible stuff to be injected into cows, the growth hormones that are going to be injected, the certain crops that are going to be genetically modified. Having a McDonald's cheeseburger, wait, so I don't get sued by McDonald's, I'm not going to say that they're exclusive. I'm going to say that there's a lot of practices that are used inside of the agricultural communities that are not great for human survival. But that goes all the way back to, what we see for Nestle. And again, I don't want Nestle to sue me.
Yeah. No, and
but,
it even goes further than that.
And Nestle, who makes like hot chocolate and different milks, they're now the people that are creating formulas for infants. And when you look at the ingredients, the only thing I think that they exclude from Quick, let's shake it and make it chocolate milk, is the color brown. And that's what you're feeding to your newly born child.
Yeah, and
I might be wrong. Don't sue me, Nestle. Don't sue me, Nestle.
Yeah. But it's worse than that. The first confirmed case of of type 2 diabetes in a entirely breastfed baby in the US was found in 2021, I think. So the level of consumption of seed oils, which includes omega-6 linoleic acid, is the most inflammatory of the lot, and it's the one that drives metabolic disorder. Means that the mother was consuming so much of that in her own diet that much of that inflammatory lipid was going through in the breast milk that a 6-month-old 100% breastfed baby had developed type 2 diabetes. So your diet's bad when it gives you an illness. It's really bad when it's so bad that it goes through the breast milk and makes the kid sick.
And there's actual studies on this, and I've gone through this, and I'm going to give some shout outs and some props to oh, what is his name? What I've learned, and that's his YouTube moniker, WIL. What I've learned, and it's Joseph Everett,
Yeah.
and he
Okay.
published a study. Well, he didn't publish it. He mentioned a study where basically obesity drives an improper mental formation through breastfeeding for children that breastfeed. So we want to think that breastfeeding is the healthy and natural and most best way to go. And in 10 out of 10 cases, it actually is, except for people that are metabolically challenged. So people that are obese are going to feed a deficient breast milk to their children. And I'm going to go past this
Yeah.
in what we've seen for the metabolic condition evolving. And I'm not even going to say for evolving, I'm going to go through it as being treated. So people that have taken the jab, there is going to be a deficiency inside of their metabolic, what they can produce by way of milk. And for their children, and I've even seen the metabolic conditions. Well, it was published by AstraZeneca and also published by Pfizer in the number of spontaneous abortions or spontaneous the ending of children inside of what's in stillbirths inside of a natural cycle that followed the jab. So we're looking at things from a very broad perspective, and we can say that we can chemically reproduce breast milk, which there's no doubt in my mind that we can, but we're not doing that. What we're actually doing is we're feeding children something that's going to addict them to sugars, and that they'll crave and they'll cry without because it's a commercial-based product where boob milk. Okay, let's go with it. Like there's people selling boob milk, breast milk on Facebook. Like there are groups for this.
Yeah.
You can buy breast milk, and there are even adults that will pick this up and consume it for themselves. And I've seen groups on that too, which to me seems a little troubling, but you know what? I get it. At the same time, is the breast milk you're buying coming from the right source? In as much as you could buy like isomilk, which is a rice-based solution for milk for children that are lactose intolerant. The whole thing is really fucking confusing. And I see why people are so unhealthy because of the information and products that are being provided.
Yeah, well, they've been hit by the propaganda campaign since the 60s. The Sugar Association in the U.S. Funded 3 Harvard scientists in the late 60s, I guess it was, to publish scientific articles and papers blaming the rise in heart disease on saturated fats instead of sugars, and they knew it was actually the sugar that was doing it. And then the seed oil industry jumped on top of that, because up until the Second World War, most seed oils were industrial lubricants. The biggest consumer of rapeseed oil in 1910 was the Royal Navy. It's a steam engine and maritime drive shaft lubricant. And during the Second World War, rapeseed production went through the roof in Canada to support the U.S. and Royal Navies, sending ships back and forth across both oceans. And then suddenly we decided, let's make a modified version of it called canola and put it into the human food chain. That stuff didn't exist in the human food chain until the early 1900s. Didn't exist, right? It's an entirely manufactured product, and yet it's driving human out of metabolic disease and other inflammatory disease because it's a poison. No one was running around using canola oil for cooking 200 years ago. It didn't exist. It was invented as an industrial lubricant during the Industrial Revolution. And now we're feeding it to people. It's no different than feeding people 10W40, except the branding is different.
Well, I'm glad you actually brought that up and made the distinction between rapeseed and canola oil. When we were growing up, the large yellow fields, especially inside of the province of Alberta, they were called rapeseed fields or rape fields
Yeah.
because of whatever the woke movement. We don't want to call it rape anymore. We want to have a separate alternative to it, and we call it canola. And there's a lot of farmers still inside of the province that rely on canola as their number one outsource because canola is still being used.
Yeah.
And it's hard to fault them on that as much as it's hard to fault the people that still produce this and call it a healthy alternative.
Yeah. Well, this is the issue: is that agriculture is such a low margin industry. People have to grow what they need to grow to actually stay alive and make a living, and that's why those of us that are pushing into more regenerative, and healthier agriculture face an uphill struggle, because the campaign that has been pushed by governments, particularly the processed food industry, is enormous, because that's where the high margin stuff is. You take canola oil; it's about 80 cents US to produce 1,000 calories. Right. So if you want to produce a prepackaged manufactured meal in a TV dinner type tray and sell it for $10 US or $12 US, you have to put all of about $1.60, maybe $1.80 worth of ingredients in it, plus a bit of plastic packaging. You got less than $2.50 in the whole thing, and you're selling it for 10 or 12 bucks. Well, that's a pretty good profit margin. You're not going to get that profit margin out of grass-fed beef, or grass-fed bison or sheep, or healthy stuff that's good for the human body. And so there's a massive advertising campaign to try and tell everyone that this stuff's good for you. But if you look at the rise of obesity and metabolic disease and autoimmune disease and all that kind of stuff, and there's multi-factors to it. It's not just the food, but it's also exacerbated by some of the other pharmaceuticals and stuff. But since late 70s, effectively in North America, interestingly, Australia didn't see the rise in metabolic diseases hit until after 2000. And that's when McDonald's changed from cooking chips in tallow to cooking chips in canola oil. So it's an interesting link. But there's this push to use these products, and because it's created demand for it, if a farmer's deciding what he's got to put in the crop in the spring, he's got to pay his bills. He's running really fine margins, and he can't afford to go put a crop in that he can't sell at the end of the year. So he's got to go and plant some of this stuff. And so it's not that, you get some people who say, oh, the farmers just need to stop it. Well, no, the whole societal paradigm needs to shift. People need to understand that all the propaganda from the processed food industry, from government agencies and everything else, who want to produce high volumes of high calorie, low nutrient, highly inflammatory junk foods for let's face it, all that stuff needs to be rolled back over a period of time. And if people are demanding high nutrient density, good quality, regeneratively raised foods, farmers will shift that direction, because that's where the demand is. But it's got to be driven by consumer demand, and that's got to be driven by a societal paradigm shift in healthy eating. And right now, I hate to say it, as much as having a universal health care seems nice to a lot of people, until people actually have to bear the brunt of the cost of their health and lifestyle decisions, I don't think we're going to see a lot of change, or certainly not very quickly, because we've got this system that just rescues people, even though it's just medicating symptoms. They just give people more and more pharmaceuticals to cover up the problem. But because that's free, people go down that route, and they don't take the effort to do the research or spend a little bit of extra money to ensure that they're eating healthily, and avoiding the consequences of all this junk. So it's a very complex issue that goes a long way back.
Well, and we can top it up with celebrating body awareness, or us basically having been forced on us the idea that being obese is still being healthy, and it's not.
Oh, it drives me nuts. Have you seen that? What was she, Miss Teen Alabama, or the whatever award that came out? So just
The
recently,
dude?
some morbidly
Yeah,
obese girl.
it was a fat
Sorry?
dude that dressed up as a chick.
Oh,
It was a
yeah,
fat
no, it
dude that
wasn't that
dressed
one.
up
No,
as a
this was
chick
actually.
and won like a Miss Universe, whatever it was. No, sorry, go on.
Oh, I know. Yeah, no, I saw that. I saw that one too. No, there was this one. She won Miss Junior Alabama or whatever it's called, something like that. But she's morbidly obese, and everyone's trying to say, "Oh, this is beautiful, this, that, and the other." Well, no, it's not. Right? This is someone who's going to have a life of chronic disease. It's tragic, really. It's bad for her. It's bad for all the girls that are influenced by her that go, "Oh, look, I can win a Miss Alabama competition if I, even though I'm morbidly obese and probably won't live till I'm 40." It's it's horrific, really, when you think about it. I mean, the American life expectancy is actually dropping, not just because of the jab, although that's a big part of it, but because metabolic disease is getting so bad that it's actually reducing the average life expectancy. Um, you can't wallpaper over the fact that obesity and chronic metabolic disease is bad for you, and we should not be being body positive towards lack of health, because you're destroying people's lives doing it. That's what it comes down to. The average person in the US suffers from 20 years of chronic disease towards the end of their life. Well, that's ridiculous. So they're say they die at 75. It means from 55 to 75 they're in pain, they have reduced mobility, they have some sort of stuff, they're eating a cocktail of pharmaceuticals to keep them going, all sort of stuff. What kind of life is that? You go to Kenya and you go to see the Maasai and the Samburu. These guys are like tall 6'2" chiseled warriors with no body fat on them, and they live till they're set and they live till they're 76. But the thing is, the disease that kills them hits them 2 weeks before they die. They're literally out walking across the Masai Mara, following the cattle and chasing away lions one day. The next day, they're not feeling very good. And 2 days later, they're dead. And so their health span is, to within a week or so of their death. Whereas in North America, it's like 20 years of chronic pain and disease. This is the thing. We need to get out of our little box here in North America and look out and go, hang on a second. How is it that people have no modern medicine? They walk around barefoot, following their cows around the Masai Mara, live as long as we do, live a healthier life than we do, and they're fit and healthy until like 4 or 5 days before they die. Maybe there's a lesson there we could learn.
Well, and they're pain free, and I think that's the
Yeah.
biggest thing. Because if they had massive amounts of pain, then you'd see a lot of the same advertising that we see inside of Canada or the United States or North America or Western culture in the over-the-counter medications that you can buy for pain mitigation or pain maintenance.
Yeah.
And I mean, we can even go into the opioid crisis based on that. Is that people have been addicted to opioids just based on not wanting to feel pain. That's not the sole reason. Another one of the reasons that we're facing in Canada right now is because, if you're feeling kind of shitty and you're not sure where your life is going, you can just go and sign up for free opioids, and you don't even have to travel to BC. You can get that shit free in almost any province in the country right now, even though it hasn't been afforded as an option inside of every province inside of the country. They're feeding addiction. They're creating addiction to pain mitigation, and that pain mitigation happens to fall on mental healthness, mental well-being. Whereas if you're not feeling good, just take this pill. It'll eliminate your pains, and it'll make you forget about what you're going on. And it's not much different than promoting alcohol as a mitigation of pain, where metabolically speaking, once you get on these things, it does nothing for your body. It doesn't cure your actual pain. It doesn't address your core symptoms. And worse yet is it creates an addiction that you need to continuously feed into harder drugs, into a literal crisis.
Oh yeah. I mean, this is a major issue, and it's and there's a whole there's a whole plethora of things that feed into it. The crisis of meaning and everything else. But effectively, most of these things, all they do is numb you. They just numb the person who's suffering from the pain or suffering from the loneliness or the anxiety, or whatever. All it does is puts like a numbness blanket over them, turns them into a zombie. It doesn't actually help anything. It doesn't deal with the root core problem at all. But there's a thing. It's profitable. It's easy. The doctors prescribing it are driving around in Aston Martins or Lamborghinis. So for a small sector of society, it works just fine. But for the people who are the victims at the back end of this, it's a disaster for sure.
Now, we spent a lot of time talking about, health and pharmaceuticals and stuff. Are you a trained professional?
No, it's just I I've had dealt with family who have dealt with chronic illness and autoimmune disease. And then when I got into the regenerative agriculture space, my family's got a small butcher shop in Sylvan Lake, and we deal with a lot of customers that come in to see us because they can't eat the commercially produced stuff for whatever reason. They react to various chemicals and whatever. So I've just been exposed to this stuff for quite a while, and I've had an interest in human health and human physiology. So I'm not a professional. I'm just a well-versed amateur, if you want to put it that way. It's just something that I've been interested in for quite some time, and have motivation to know about it because of family issues. So that's where it comes from.
No, I'm not trying to. Excuse me. I'm not trying to discredit your work by any sense of the imagination. But I think that what we're seeing from dealt with the mainstream is there's guys like you, there's guys like me that have actually dug into whether it's our own personal health in trying to achieve or in trying to not suffer, or other communities that have kind of dealt with similar situations, that they're supportive groups, and we have these conversations. Is I think there's a lot of conversations that aren't being had on metabolic health. And at the other side of the pendulum, I think there's a lot of companies that are profiting off of the similar situations in what they're promoting through supplements and vitamins. I mean, if you go into your pharmacy or your local grocer, you'll see a lot of pharmaceuticals, inside of Band-Aids, inside of pain mitigators, inside of cough syrups, and inside of whatever. But then there's a whole other section on health, and then there's a vitamins section on that. And one of the things that's happening inside of Canada right now is that all those supplements have gone up in price because Canada, well, I'm not going to say Canada, the Liberals basically decided they want to tax more vitamins than not. So there's a big portion of what we can do by way of supplementation. And I think there's a great amount of ignorance when it comes down to actual supplementation on, what we could be taking or what we should be taking. And, when you look at the one extreme where it says, take 1 million picograms of vitamin D per year at the absolute extreme of the health people. Whereas the other side says, no, all you have to do is take 2 aspirin and call me in the morning. We have a couple of different extremes that we're dealing with here. And on the metabolic side of things, as somebody that suffers from metabolic conditions, it's through arthritis and inflammation, chronic and migraine headaches, I find the biggest thing that I can do is not visit the pharmacy, but visit the actual meat food aisle inside of whatever grocery that I deal with. If I don't consume inflammatory foods, I can be pain free. And if
Yeah.
I'm pain free, then my CNS, my central nervous system, doesn't trigger GI impacts. If I stray outside of those worlds, then because I am that much more acutely aware of what I'm going through, I recognize that if I have some pizza on a Friday night, I'm going to feel like a piece of shit on a Saturday. And there are certain
Yeah.
circumstances where I'm ready to deal with the consequences, and that's a part of our living. But for the
Yeah.
most part, the biggest part of our living is making yourself feel and be functionally healthy with a proper diet, right?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, no, I agree with you. I mean, this is where, for me, I went, I don't know, what was it, 4 years ago. I went 100% carnivore diet for about 3 months, and the change in my physiology was amazing. And so I've nibbled around ever since then on the sort of ancestral paleo side, predominantly meat based. And it's not to say I don't have the odd cheat day here and there. I certainly do, um, but it's really funny. Like, my hands start moving as soon as I start thinking about this. If I just eat a single bag of potato chips, just like Lay's potato chips, just one of the small bags, out of a
Lay's, don't
yeah,
sue him. He's just having a bag of
yeah,
chips. That's all he's
just out
talking
of
about.
gas
Lay's,
station,
we don't need lawsuits.
or any of the chips anyway. Um, if I have a bag of chips today, tomorrow morning when I wake up, my fingers are going to be stiff.
That's
And
right.
years ago, I might not have noticed.
Stu's internet provider is taking a temporary timeout, but I'm going to go on with the same thing. In that, I go through the same thing with potato chips. I go through the same thing with bread. And in the summertime, it's a lot harder to stay away from, some of these things. You want to have a hamburger, you want to have a hot dog, you're cooking it up on the grill. And at the same time, you don't want to have a bunless burger or a bunless hot dog. So what we end up doing is we end up taking these things with inflammatory foods. Now, when you're outside and you're cooking a couple of dogs on the grill or on the griddle or over the fire pit, one of the hardest things to do is to find the condiments that are going to go along right with that. And when you're out camping or when you're out in the Canadian summer, your go-to is going to be a bag of chips, or it's going to be a bag of bullshit. So inside of the processed foods that you consume in a hot dog, in doing one of these Canadian-esque type adventures, you're going to be consuming products that are hyper-inflammatory, and I think that's where Stu was going with this. But welcome back again, Stu, and take it away, brother.
Yeah, well, like I was saying, I noticed the inflammation straight away, and now, like, you're just talking about a bunless hot dog. That's what I eat now, and I've gotten used to it, and I enjoy it. If I get a burger off the grill, I've just got the patty off the grill. I don't bother with a bun. If I eat the bun, and my wife and kids can't anyway, because we got celiac in the family, so we got to have a gluten-free bun if we have one. And it's not that we do it once in a while. We get a gluten-free something for the kids, but generally eat the hot dog off the grill, and it seems funny to start with, but after a while, everyone gets used to it. No one really worries about it. I've got my 5-year-old. She'll be walking around with just a wiener on its own. It's come off the fire, and she's just wandering, or off the smoker or whatever. She's walking around munching away on it, happy as Larry. And as long as you get used to it, then kind of people ask you.
And another temporary break. I mean, keeping in mind that my streamcast with him is going actually a lot better than it did with Kelly in Red Deer being hardlined. It's actually surprising. But what he's saying is basically that wait, I'm going to let him back in here for the conversation. And what we're going to go through is there's a very distinct difference on people that recognize their metabolic challenges versus people that will use their metabolic challenges as the Achilles heel in their life and demand social justice. They'll demand you have to abide by their lifestyles because their lifestyles have made them unhealthy. Whereas, me as somebody that's metabolically challenged, because I've overate and overdrank myself into periods of massive amounts of pain that I was born with. So I have a genetic condition. And when I eat improperly, my genetic condition flares up metabolically. So as long as I'm keeping inside of a proper diet, then I don't have to feel the same pains. Am I perfect at it? Absolutely not. And I think with a lot of people that look towards dieting and diet protocols, there are certain things that you have to come to accept. Carbohydrates are an addictive substance. So the more that of those that you consume, the more you are streamlined into that. The other thing is that constant consumption shuts off your full hormone. And you have two hormones that work inside of your body, and one is ghrelin, which tells you when you're hungry, and the other is leptin, which tells you when you're full. If you chronically feed, insulin shuts off your leptin response, which means the more chronically you're snacking throughout the day, you're shutting off your full period. So it's not just eating Chinese food and it being high in carbohydrates and sugars that makes you crave these things. It's basically the carbohydrates and sugars on the snacking side of things that shuts off the trigger inside of your body to let you know that you're actually full. So there's a lot of things that are going on inside of the diets, inside of Canadians, inside of Americans, inside of Western families that I don't think a lot of people that understand. And it's, what's amazing, Stu? And I'm going to go through this before I let you speak. Is that we're about 90 minutes into a conversation about you standing up and speaking at the Veterans for Freedom event in Red Deer. And we have talked for literally fucking zero amount of that time, which is kind of cool because what I can appreciate is that you're somebody that's taken time to, we'll get into this, is that not only have you taken some time to dig into your own personal health and the health of your family, is that you're able to actually provide the information, verbally. And if anybody was engaged in the conversation about their health or their metabolic health, they could probably come to you. And if you couldn't, and I'm not saying that you should be the one to give them the advice, is that you'd probably steer them in the right direction, saying, hey, you know what, if you're in constant pain, if you're in constant GI issues, maybe have a look at this. Am I wrong?
No, I've had lots of people that have had that, and steer them in the right direction in terms of who to talk to, because your average Western doctor is not the one who's versed in this stuff, but if you've been in this kind of health food space long enough, then you start looking at, there's a bunch of doctors, mostly in the U.S., some in Eastern Europe, they're out on social media. They've got their YouTube podcasts and interviews. They've got their clinics where they're treating people using lifestyle and diet as opposed to all the pharmaceutical interventions. And those of us that have been researching this for a while and kind of in that space, it doesn't take very long. It's like, well, I don't really know the answer to that, but I know a doctor in Texas. You should probably send him an email and he could probably give you some advice, or talk to Paleomedicina in Hungary. They do this for a living. That's what they do, and they're specialists at it. So you don't need to be the person advising someone. You just you can tell them where they can find the information that they need, and we've got quite a few customers that come through our store that started their journey that way. They just had a conversation and they're like, I'm suffering with X, Y, and Z. And it's like, oh, well, have you thought about this? And, maybe you should go and have, watch this doctor. Like Ken Berry's another one in the States who's very, very good, or Paul Saladino or Sean Baker or whatever. But Ken Berry's excellent. He's he's a proper Southerner, and he's got that, very blunt manner about him, but he talks about metabolic health all the time. Well, people can listen to his podcast for a while and find a solution to about 90% of the metabolic disorders they run into, because he's interviewing the right people, and you go, oh, okay, there's the expert I need to talk to. But in the mainstream, we don't have that access. So it's guys like you and me have to point
it out to. And I'm not going to say that Keith or Ken Berry has anything bad to say, but they go to somewhat great extremes in pontificating what they're saying. In that you have to be perfect to find your right health. And I'm not going to say that you have to be perfect, but they come up with, welcome back again, Stu. They come up with some ideas that are a little crazy to what we have. So is it Keith or Ken Berry? He'd advocated for boiling your eggshells and then throwing them in the oven and then grinding them up into a powder, and then taking these powders to increase your magnesium and your calcium and certain other nutrients. Whereas I don't believe that 100% of what he says is absolutely necessary. So if we go back and kind of drill this into a paleontologic, let's go back into the early humans in survival. We've made it up to this point, and it's only the last 100 years that we've had pharmaceuticals, and we're doing fucking terrible because of them. People are living longer, but they're living longer in pain and suffering, which is a terrible place to be. Whereas prior to 100 years ago, people were living for similar amounts of time, if not longer, because we never had actual historical record of these things. And they were doing that. They were doing that without boiling their eggshells, drying them out in an oven, grinding them into a powder, and sprinkling that shit over their food. We don't have to do that. We fucking don't have to do that.
No, I mean, I can understand where you're dealing with someone who's got chronic disease, and they're coming out of a background of really bad diet where there might be some benefit in some of those more extreme things. But if you look at it, there's some really cool surveys done on the Blackfoot and Dakota Sioux way back in the early 1910s and 19 teens, where they determined that the average life expectancy of the Blackfoot and Dakota Sioux, aside from suffering from physical trauma, was longer than current life expectancy in Canada now. And what did they eat? They eat bison, deer, elk, and a few berries in the summertime. They got all the nutrients they needed out of that. They were lean, they're fit, they're healthy, they were tall. You see the pictures of these Blackfoot guys back in the late 1800s and whatever. You see pictures of them. They're all 6 or 8 inches taller than the British guys that they were meeting at these meetings. They were literally, the chiseled warriors that you imagine them to be. You go to Kenya with the Maasai and the Samburu. Same thing right now. They live on, like the Maasai live on beef. 98% of their diet is beef. They follow their cows around and they eat beef. That's it. The Samburu drink milk and blood mix, which it doesn't appeal to me that much, but they're very much the same. Meat, milk and blood, and they live until they're 80 years old, and they're fit and lean and healthy, and they're all 6'3" and chiseled. So all of this complicated nonsense that we dive into in the West is, I think we're missing out on the simplicity of what we're designed to do. We spent most of human existence eating what we could catch, and it worked just fine.
No, that's absolutely right. Hey, listen, man. We're about $1.50 into 2-hour conversation, and it's not that I'm not ungrateful for the conversation, because this is the conversation that I love to have. When it comes down to health and how people can be healthier, I think that there can't be any more better conversations that's going on than what we're having right now. But on the same token, you're invited out to the Veterans for Truth and Canadians for Freedom event in Red Deer this weekend. And what's going to be your portion of topic of conversation for the event?
Well, my topic is called selection and maintenance of the aim, and it's basically talking about a military principle that unfortunately the the freedom, if you want to call it the freedom movement, or the sort of people who want a restoration of a free society based on the rule of law, looking for, have kind of missed out on. And it's a management principle that we're taught in the military when we talk about complex soft system management. But it's explaining the reason why you have to have a goal to go toward. Um, a lot of the people in the, like I say, the freedom movement, or whatever you want to call it, tend to be come from the conservative side of society. But conservatism predominantly is focused on what you don't want, not what you do want. It's about resisting change to something that you don't like, and that never works.
Holy smokes,
It's a constant cycle. It's a constant cycle of just
Tommy.
picking the. Sorry.
Tommy.
Yeah, but this is the
Fucking with
thing.
you.
Is that,
No, but go on.
yeah, what we end up with is a bunch of people that just continuously lose battles. And I mean, in societal battles for like 60, 70 years, so that the average conservative now has come to basically accept socialism in general. We accept all of the big government, big spending, massive weight of bureaucracy on us as just the way it is. We're just trying to resist a change to this veneer of freedom that we have, that's literally just a veneer. There's not much left of it. As opposed to saying, you know what, actually we are a better society than that. I would, I think it should be set on a set of principles. We should be able to build a better society that doesn't have this overarching weight of socialist nonsense hanging around our shoulders and around our necks, literally mortgaging our children's future off into the, however many decades down the road. The federal government has printed something like 500% of Canada's money supply in the last 3 years, something along those lines, during the whole COVID scam, and that drives inflation. It's a scam that drives inflation. It's basically just a tax on the poor. Inflation is just a tax. That's all it is. And for what? Literally for what? So you've got children now that are like 2 or 3 years old that already owe so much money off into the distance that they'll have to pay through taxes or inflation, that they're sunk under a $100,000 tax burden before they even get to school. It's insane.
Can I stop you there? Just for a quick second. The $10 daycare program that the Liberals introduced, there are children now that haven't been born. They're going to be paying on taxes for a service that they may not actually be able to access themselves.
Yep.
Through the $10 daycare. Does that sound right? Does that sound like what you're talking about?
Yeah, that's exactly right. It's total insanity. It's effectively the country writing checks that it can't cash, and it's to support this massive bureaucracy. It comes down to the fact that the rule of law doesn't exist anymore. We've ended up going from the divine right of kings to the rule of law in the late 1600s, where we eventually kind of threw them off, and we had this thing, where people actually were treated as though they actually had some inalienable rights. And then over the last probably 80 years, we've descended into the divine right of bureaucracy, where you've got this class of people who are the civil service bureaucracy of Canada that exercises executive power. They have more power and influence than the elected representatives in both Parliament and the legislature. And they're above the law. They can regulate. They see it as their duty to regulate everyone else and control everyone else's lives. And so instead of being civil servants, they see themselves as civil masters of civil society. And so it's a form of fascist technocracy. And in order to defeat that and get ourselves back to some sort of semblance of civilization, we need to have a larger vision. You can't just keep playing whack-a-mole against all the crazy about the, you know, the trans activists protesting for Hamas at in Edmonton or something. I mean, that's just a distraction. I mean, it's insane,
it's an embarrassing distraction.
It's an embarrassing distraction, but it is a distraction because all that's meant to do is further destabilize society. The more unstable society becomes, the more people they call for the king. They want to have an authoritarian person to come in and solve the problem or whatever, and that's exactly what the hardcore want. They want an authoritarian government system, effectively taking us back to feudalism, going back to William the Conqueror time, where you have a small amount of nobility, a very small elite that treats everyone else like serfs. And that's where we're halfway there already, 3/4 of the way there already. And in order to stop that or change that, we need to have everyone focused on a vision of what we want in society, and then work towards that, rather than playing whack-a-mole and just smacking the odd thing that pops up that we don't like and inevitably failing. We need to say, no, let's adopt a wider strategy. We need to select the aim we want to go to. Where do we want our children and our grandchildren to live in 25, 30 years' time? What do we want our society to look like? Define that in terms of value system and aim towards that. And then adopt an appropriate strategic planning process, whether it's in your personal life, whether it's in politics or economics or cultural life or whatever, to drive towards that game. And ignore anything that isn't stopping you getting there, and anything that gets in the way, then figure out how to whack that. If you're going to play whack-a-mole, whack the moles that are in your way. And so I'll bring it down to an analogy. When you wake up in the morning, no one ever wakes up in the morning, walks out in their pajamas, gets in their car, starts driving around, and 3 hours later decides what they're going to do for the day. That's not what you do. You wake up in the morning and you think, you know what? It's Saturday. I need to go and get some dog food from Costco. I need to swing past Superstore to get blah, blah, blah. So you get up, you brush your teeth, you shave, whatever you do, you go and eat your breakfast, then you walk out to your car, you kind of form a mental map of how you're going to get to Costco, and then how you're going to go from Costco to Superstore and then back home. And you get in your car and you do that. You start off with an aim. You have a plan and an aim. Your goal for the day is set up in advance, right? Whereas we as a society should be doing the same thing. What are we aiming towards? What do we want our children and grandchildren to live in 25 years' time? You build that, and then you can come up with a clearer plan of how you get there. And of course, are there going to be obstacles there? Yes, of course. You're going to have the radical left who just want to destabilize society and turn it into a modern rendition of feudal serfdom. But the point is, if you know where your goal is, you can ignore the distractions and you can just deal with the problems that are in the way, and you can work out the strategies required to do that. You can deal with the mainstream media, you can deal with academia, you can deal with the civil service and the unions and all these societal institutions that are corrupted and want to drive us towards barbarism. But you can do it in a way that takes you towards your goal, instead of just running around screaming about all the problems in society and not actually achieving much. So that's generally the principle. And so I'm going to go through the process that we learn in the military of how to do that, or how to manage a campaign like that, and why it's important to be able to work towards a strategic aim, and the consequences of not having that versus the benefits of having a strategic aim. And then a couple of
can I cut you off for one quick sec?
Where we need to go. Yep.
No, sorry. And this isn't to try and take away from your conversation. It's just that I'm old and I have a small bladder. So I want you to continue to kind of converse on this. I'm just going to tuck out of the room and I'm going to have a quick pee. But I want you to continue to roll on through this, and I'll definitely go back and scroll back through. The one thing that I can appreciate is that you're not somebody that's what do they call us? Conspiracy theorists. It seems like you've done a lot of homework into, and I'm not going to say that you've done this for the overall society. I think I can probably recognize that a lot of the research you've done is for your own life and the lifestyle of your family. Am I wrong on that?
No, that's exactly right. Yeah. It's just, I was in the military and I was quite specialized in what I did, so I did a lot of research to be really good at that. And staff college points you in a certain direction, and then I got specific family, issues, requirements, health challenges, that sort of stuff, and so I've got that sort of logical researching brain. I come out of the sciences and in education as well, and so my view is figure out what the problem is, work out the path to the solution, and then get on with it. So that's kind of how I've driven it, and I'm not afraid to sit
That's
down
right.
and read a half a dozen papers to do it.
Now you're going to be given 2 minutes while I go pee to have an open mic, and this is kind of exclusive. So
All
I'm going
right.
to tuck out right now, and your open mic starting
All right.
now.
Okay. Yeah. So in basic summary, when we're talking about the subject of selecting and maintaining a name, it's about the difference between managing complex systems and managing hard systems, which may be complicated, but they're never complex. So, example of a hard system is something we build. Let's say a 747 Boeing airliner. It's complicated. It's got 4 ranges, massive amounts of electronic systems, and all that kind of stuff. But the operation of and the failure of any of those systems has predictable results, and we can anticipate how they're going to work given a certain set of circumstances. And so we use linear management to do that. And humans are naturally we naturally do linear management style animal. We invent things and we build things and then we manage those things and we do it quite well. So it's a problem reaction solution style of management. You get airborne in a big 4-engine jet. If you're an airline pilot and one engine fails, you know exactly what you need to do. You need to drop the nose and blah, blah, blah. There's a whole procedure, and you know how your climb rate's going to change. You know how your fuel burn's going to change. You're going to, you know how your speed's going to change. All that stuff. It's predictable. It's all kind of worked out in advance. And you do a set of drills, and you recover the aircraft, and you land it, and you go and get engine change, and the problem gets fixed. And that's linear management, and it works quite well. And it doesn't generate that many unintended consequences because you're dealing with a relatively simple hard system. The problem with human societies and biological systems like the human body, or the soil microbiome, or the biology in the gut of a ruminant animal, or that sort of stuff, is that they're extremely complex, and the interrelations between those complexities are not predictable in the time window, and so you end up with unintended consequences for any action you take. And so in order to manage a complex soft system, you have to manage towards a goal. And if you don't have a goal, you will always fail. Every action you take will develop, and because you're not managing towards a goal, you have no guiding principle by which you refine your plan, change what you're doing to minimize the unintended consequences and maximize the benefit to get you towards your goal. So that's what the talk's going to be about. It's going to be about bringing out the differences in management styles, why you'd use one versus the other in different circumstances, and also take that to more of a societal thing. What do we need to do as a society to take us away from a barbaric, feudal system towards back towards a civilized society, and what management position is required to be able to do that. So that's kind of the summation of the talk. It's only going to be like 40-ish minutes, and we'll run through that. And for a lot of people, it's going to be new. For guys who have been through staff college or some senior management courses, particularly the private sector ones, they'll recognize parts of it as an iterative management process, and they'll recognize the value of setting a specific goal. And as a society, I think we need to do that because we've kind of lost that, and that's what the talk's about. So there you go. That was the open mic
Fuck, man,
session.
what are you, like 150 years old? Like, you contain an amazing amount, like a wealth of knowledge inside of the conversation. Doesn't matter what I throw at you, hardball, softball, doesn't matter. You're able to respond and respond in a way that seems proper and prudent towards longevity and towards a Canadian size system. So no, you've done an amazing job, and I'm not going to say that I do these things as tests. I literally had to pee, but I was listening to you while I was peeing, like all Leslie Nielsen, Naked Gun 2.0 methodology.
Awesome.
No,
Yeah,
you
yeah.
did an amazing job,
Brilliant.
and the big thing that I'm going to give you a commendation on is that you're able to pick up on a conversation and walk through a set of idealistics backed by information and studies and information that a lot of people just simply can't do. So I mean, you've taken some time to and again, this is for your own personal existence that I don't think that a lot of people have the opportunity to do. I think a lot of people are way too busy in focusing on their own life, their own lifestyles, and keeping ahead of the chopping arm of the mortgage brokers and taking away their
Yeah.
home, their lifestyles. And you've done an amazing job inside of just like a couple minutes where I just had to pee. That was fantastic, man. You did an amazing job with that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the thing, but that being said, my career path through the first sort of 25 years of my professional life was focused on that kind of stuff. You know, I was a military officer, and I spent quite a bit of time in a dynamic environment. We were doing battlefield aviation support, so part of it. We were part of a complex moving picture, and things moved quickly, and you had to be able to think rationally and come up with what we call reasoned opinion forming. You had to be able to take whatever limited information you gather, run through a logical process to come up with a pretty good answer. It's never going to be perfect. Get on with the plan, fully accepting the fact that there's going to be holes in it, and then figure out how to improvise and adapt as you go along. And then when I started flying special forces, it was more of the same, but just a little bit more intense and more accurate. And so, you know, that's part of the thing that we bring to the party as someone who's done, you know, combat estimate planning, that we call it, or military estimate planning in a military headquarters and on the sort of front end of operations, is that we are trained and educated in a management style that you don't see in civvy life generally, unless you're in senior management of a big company that sent you to a particular school to learn that stuff. And so, you know, I've just been very fortunate of having been taught early in my life that style of management and decision making cycle. And so, you know, obviously it takes you down a particular path, and then I have an interest in science as well. So you combine the two, and here we are.
Shazam!
So
No, and
that's
that's
right. Yeah.
and that's great because I talk to a lot of people about diet, nutrition, and health, and there's a lot of confusion that kind of goes on. But everything that you've studied is along the lines of 100% of everything that I believe. You knock down bullshit foods, you eat the proper foods, and then you're at a less requirement for pharmaceuticals and let's call it modern medicine.
Yeah.
And I took some time, based on my own specific studies, and I drilled it back to 5th century BCE to Hippocrates, and I'm sure you're familiar with the Hippocratic Oath for doctors these days, right?
Yeah.
And Hippocrates, and I did this for a very specific reason, because when we were going into the last respiratory virus season, which I was late on, is I wanted to publish a book based on actual health and nutrition versus pharmaceutical intervention. So I mean, this is kind of a self promotion to me. I mean, it's pound chicken soup on Amazon if you're looking for my book. But it's basically the same thing. Is that it's taking something that went back to 5th century BCE, before Common Era or before Christ, as some people know it, and drilling out what the father of Western medicine drilled out, in that food is our path to health. And you've taken
Yeah.
a lot of the same principles, and without
Yeah.
having to go
Food
through
is
the
food is sorry, I was saying
sorry,
food
man.
is medicine. I mean, and that's what people don't realize.
Well, food is medicine, but food is also poison. I mean, what we're consuming by way of processed goods these
Oh yeah,
days
that's exactly right. Yeah.
is
Yeah. Well, 75% of your immune system is in your gut.
that's right. Um, and there's a small portion of it that flows
Yeah.
through, the rest of our bloodstream, our heart, and our brains. 5%, literally 5% energy that goes
Yeah.
through that for by way of consumption, and we're either consuming it or we're consuming the byproducts of it, in so that the rest of our organs can kind of assemble it. So I mean, health is a very serious condition, and especially if we're going to take these times like they did throughout COVID and tell you that an injection is your path to health versus a healthy lifestyle. If that's what somebody's telling you, take this pill or you're not going to be healthy,
Yeah.
take
It's
this
crazy.
jab or you're not going to be healthy, then you're probably not listening to the right people. And I mean, we spent about $1.50 of time talking about that, where I think that we kind of come to a similar conclusion that no, metabolic health and proper health is based on principles. There's a certain portion of it on mental health, which will come from metabolic health that we never had an opportunity to
Yeah.
talk to. Listen, man, we're about 2 hours into the conversation. We got a few minutes left here, and I don't like these things to extend on. And don't get me wrong, fuck, I'll have you on again. let's
Yeah.
go through the V4F event on the weekend, and I'm happy to have you on anytime for a live chat. And I think that
Yeah. Okay.
a lot of the viewers that we have will be the same. But wrap it up in why should people be coming out to Red Deer this weekend to have a look at the event, and why should they hang out for your conversation?
Well, I think it's important to understand that our society is badly broken. A lot of people are not seeing the root cause of it, and we've got a bunch of people in V4F that come from a different type of professional training, and have slightly perhaps have a different
Survival.
perspective. You know, our profession. Yeah, our profession is warfare. Our profession is surviving in some of the worst conditions that you can get into. And so we've been taught skills on how to survive, to operate when things are really bad, and it gives us a different perspective. So I think for those who understand there's something wrong with our society and want to do something about it, and want to understand what the background way of thinking, if you want to put it that way, or the background paradigm that they might need to adopt to be able to come up with some fresh ideas and work towards a solution in our society. Come along and listen to what we have to say. I think you'll find it valuable, and most importantly, you'll be able to meet, you'll be able to have conversations afterwards. Obviously, that's a big part of it. It's not just the speech itself, but be able to confirm or deny different ideas and thoughts, and be able to bounce some ideas around and get people hopefully pointed in a direction that will benefit our society. People can go out and they can do something in their own lives that pushes the needle in the right direction rather than the wrong one. And so I think that's the benefit people will have from coming out. Plus, it'll probably be a good event, and there's a bunch of good people, and there'll be lots of good banter, and that's always good.
You know what, man? I'm looking forward to the event, and in full cycle, I when I was offered to come out to the event, I was offered to bring out like merchandise to sell off for it, which I'm not doing, because I'm actually pretty fucking terrible at promoting my own channel. So I've got nothing to sell at the event. But I am going to have something that's kind of special that will be introduced throughout the event, and I'm looking forward to it. I'm looking forward to meeting you in person, man. Like, it was a great conversation, And
All
for
right,
the
cool.
amount of time that we actually spent on talking about, the political realm versus what we spent on just on the health realm. Fuck, man. Anytime you're ready, I'm ready for another conversation. Let's get through, the next week. And then whenever there's time that you have opportunity and you want to have another conversation, I'm here for you, brother. I'm always open. I mean, we just got through
Cool.
the D-Day. Excuse me, the D-Day. Some people call it a celebration. I call it a memorial. My grandfather was one of the people that was storming the beaches of Normandy. My youngest boy was or is still a part of the Canadian Forces. I'm out of that world. I'm a a big sissy when it comes down to fighting. I'm a big sissy when it comes down to stubbing my toe. But that doesn't mean that I don't appreciate the situations and understand the changes. And one of the outside of the conversation, one of the most important guests that I've had has been you, Stu, in just talking about some of the things we talked about on metabolic health. So I want to take some time, and we've got I think it was about close to 400 people that dived into the conversation tonight, which I think is amazing.
Cool.
And throughout the cycle, we're going to see another 3,000 to 5,000 people that weigh in. Between my Substack and Twitter feeds and my YouTube channel, which is fuck all. Subscribe to my YouTube channel so that you can actually weigh in on the conversations. And I didn't do a lot of promoting the stream that was on that. Anyways, Stu, it's been an amazing conversation. Thanks everybody that took some time to come out and kind of get to know Stu before he's at the Red Deer event. I definitely want to have him on with another chat. And Stu, thanks again for giving me some of your time tonight. I mean, it was an amazing conversation. We're on a lot of the same levels without the same training, but I think you've got a little bit more by way of structure. I'm not going to lie to you. I'm not blowing smoke up your ass. So, hey, thanks a lot for taking some time with me tonight, man.
No, I know I enjoyed it, and thanks for having me on. And it's nice to talk about someone who actually appreciates the subject of metabolic health and that kind of stuff. It's an important part of our current environment and society. So yeah, no, thanks for having me, and a great conversation, really interesting.
No, it's great, man. I hope everybody has a great night, and yeah, I'll see you tomorrow. Tomorrow about 6:00 p.m. Mountain Standard Time or Mountain Daylight Time with Jamie Soleil. She's coming on to talk about some more of these events. So have a great night, everybody, and thanks for taking some time with us.